I mean, I totally understand the hesitation. And I think, honestly, like, at least for me and like for my story, the personal involvements is really what got me over that hurdle, right? Like, I had friends who had done the program. I was familiar with the professor. And so that kind of helped because I definitely had that like fear or like hesitancy, I would say, like, oh, maybe this is for people who are smarter than me or more capable or better at this. And like, I'm not the right person. And I think that was probably what got me over that fear to actually even apply. And I remember even during my interview, they were asking like some tougher questions. And I felt like, oh man, I'm such an idiot. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And actually, I think it was Bob Boyd who was like, do you like economics? Do you like finance? Are you interested in this? Are you like willing to work hard and do you want to learn more about this? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And it felt like that was kind of like a turning point, at least in the interview for me, of like, okay, like these people are on my side. They want me to do well too. And this program was honestly life-changing for me because I can look back and I can so clearly see how it set off a series of really positive events that like it got my career started. I ended up working in investing for a bit. Which then I think getting that started and then keep going now, I got into Harvard for grad school, which is working out really well. Now I'm looking into VC and like other investing opportunities, and staying involved with the school and getting to like mentor and help other undergrads who are interested in finance and really tying into this idea of like, we need more women in finance. Actually, I remember you telling me that kind of early on. And that was a quote just that stuck with me. Like, we need more women in finance. And it's so true, particularly after working at a financial institution, and just seeing that gap. And then also now being here and we're having some really, really real conversations, honestly, about like gender and race and equality and wanting to improve that. And then I feel like this finance niche, there's so much work to be done, and it's very encouraging for me to see how we are already making progress and to make more progress. So would also really love to see more women apply, frankly. But I think like being in the program really set me up for success in so many ways because it provides such a strong educational foundation, just even writing those market summaries. Like I remember the summer before the program started, we had to do weekly economic summaries. And at the time it feels really grueling and you're like, I don't even know what I'm talking about. And then somewhat recently, I actually looked back and saw those in my Google Drive and I was like, wow, those are like very solid statements that I was writing at that time that I think, I had the words in the right order, but they maybe weren't clicking the way they are now when I go back and read it. And I'm like, oh yeah, the Fed was changing rates. Like, of course, like this is part of my vocabulary, but even just like getting that started, and then also trying to figure out how to pitch a company. It's something that I feel like is very iterative and I'm still like learning how to do it better today. I recently participated in an impact investing competition and thinking through like how to make the pitch for the fundamental value of a company, like the Porter's 5 Forces, like really fundamental stuff that I really learned, frankly, in ASAP. And then all the other educations have continued to build on it. Like when I was studying for the CFA, it was a callback to stuff I learned in ASAP as well. So I think like in terms of both the educational and the hands-on piece, like it was an experience like no other. And I don't think it would have, like if I hadn't done ASAP, if I hadn't done TCM, I don't think I would have gotten to where I am today. I don't think those, like all of those different pivot points in my life, that one was really like the domino that started things for me at least. No, and I think one thing that is really special is like looking at the people that I was on a team with, at least, like we were not all from the same background. We didn't all have the same experiences or the same knowledge coming in. So it's not like there's a preset, like, oh, you need to have taken these steps ahead of time. I more think it's about like a willingness to kind of put yourself out there to a degree, and a desire to learn more. Like I think that that interest in markets is really crucial, particularly like as I continue to work in finance and a bit of a pivot now in sustainability. But just if you're interested in markets, if you're interested in economics and how the world works and you want to understand that more, then I think that curiosity will drive you to enjoy reading about these things, because it can in some ways be like a bit grueling over time, like reading a ton of news articles. Like I remember you get to a point where you're like, I can't read anymore, right? Like my brain is full of the information. But if you're genuinely interested in information, that's I think super helpful in terms of like you continue to have drive. I also feel like, I mean, it's a team effort in some ways. I know the program has continued to evolve and continue to get better. But I remember like just the economics of like working with the team, dividing up work, and really wanting to having everybody on board and wanting to have a good output, I think that's super crucial. So if you're like internally motivated, or, you know, you're motivated by being able to work with others, and if you're interested in markets, you're interested in economics, those would be really helpful. I know I approached this in a bit of a different way than some of my colleagues. Like, for example, my background, I had kind of been considering the economics and finance route. So I think a little bit more from that angle. And then also like just thinking through like a balance sheet perspective of companies. I think some of my colleagues were a little more interested from the angle of like, where is growth? Like, where are like the cool opportunities, like the innovation? And I think we need people who are interested in both, right? There's no one way to invest. There's no one way to develop your investment thesis. So if you're interested in new technologies, you know, you'll probably have a lot of drive to like research those types of companies. If you're interested in, I don't know, like retail or energy, I think investing is one of those really cool professions where it doesn't even really matter what sector you're interested in. As long as you have like something that you're passionate about, you can look at companies that are doing those things, like even like art or music, like you can invest in those areas. So I think it's really special. Man, I mean, I don't know if they're still running because of COVID, but the trips stand out as a highlight. Are they? Can I?
Yeah, we haven't done them, but they came up as a highlight in some of the other conversations.
Okay, yeah. I think those were really great, and maybe just the angle, and I'll make it Zoom friendly. So the angle of like getting to meet people in industry, I think is huge, right? So even just like Jeff Van Hart and all of our other amazing board members, and getting access to these people who are doing this as a profession daily. I think maybe that angle I didn't necessarily appreciate as much, because kind of on that trend of like, you know, I was maybe like a bit timid going into this, a bit intimidated by some of these like people who seem to know what they were doing. And I'm wondering like, do I really know what I'm doing? But having those connections and being able to have conversations and even just ask them their views, because as you're pitching, like obviously it's, I mean, for me, it was terrifying, but at the same time, like they're asking a bunch of questions about your thesis and how you're thinking about things. But I think in some of these like more casual settings, you're really able to ask them what they're thinking about, and then just being able to have that conversation as like an undergraduate student and get to think more about it. I think that's really special as well. Especially as I continue to grow my career and learning how important mentorship and sponsorship can be. I think that early access and just even really like having those conversations and making those connections can be huge. Because you can be even more like literate going forward as you continue to talk to other professionals. ASAP definitely had a lot to do with it. I think that's frankly the only reason I really got that job. Can I say, I mean, I worked at PIMCO right out of undergrad, and even during the phone interview, they were asking about like, what factors do you think are impacting markets? And I'd spent the whole summer writing weekly summaries about the factors impacting markets. So nailed that question. But yeah, in the in-person interview, I mean, two really come to mind. One of them, we were talking about Brexit at the time. And so they were asking me about like what trades I would have put on. And the follow-up on that question was, would you hedge it? And I kind of had to take a risk here, because at that point we weren't really talking that much about hedging. Like it wasn't a concept that I was as familiar with, frankly, at all. So I said no. And then they're like, why? And I was like, I wouldn't really feel comfortable investing in an instrument that I'm not familiar with. So I'd want to like look into hedging more and understand the risks better before like changing my trade, which was kind of a risk, but I was like, I'm not going to try to make something up here. Another question we got about emerging markets and what market factors would most likely impact emerging markets. And again, not an area that I had personally done a ton of research in. I had been looking at, I think, like IG corporates when it was in ASAP. That was like the area that I was focused on. So I kind of tried to pivot. I was like, well, I know like markets that impact like developed markets, for example, like the federal funds rate is one that tends to drive things, you know, or looking at like where inflation is. And so kind of trying to think about what market factors I was familiar with and how they might potentially impact, you know, we ended up having a bit of a conversation there, because the interviewer kind of was digging in on this. So then he's like, well, how do you think like emerging markets would respond then if like the Fed raises rates and things like that? And so kind of going back and forth on how like emerging markets tend to be more like they're market takers, taking what's happening in developed markets versus like market makers, because the US is like the reserve currency. And anyway, it ended up being like a pretty interesting discussion where frankly I learned a bit from what he was saying.
It sounds like maybe your interaction with the board members and the professionals that you interacted with at ASAP maybe gave you a little bit of experience with having, you know, questions coming out of left field that you have to throw something back. You can't just say,
oh yeah, it's
don't
huge.
know.
I mean, I remember like, it really felt like learning a new language, frankly. And I'd taken some coding classes and I tried to learn German at one point and failed. So learning finance felt the same way, where it's like, there's all these words that I don't know what they mean contextually. So even just like getting to listen to like two board members talking about markets, I feel like I learned something because I learned how to like coherently speak about it.
Yeah,
frankly.
it's not something you're born with. Nobody knows about this stuff from the womb. So it is a language that you have to learn, and it's just about being willing to try, you know, put in the work and try.
I will say like the most helpful thing you can do if you're thinking about it would be like talk to the people who are in the program, right? Because I think like getting a sense of like what output you'll be creating and the type of work you'll be doing, that's super helpful. I know that was helpful to me when I was thinking about applying and ultimately did apply. It was like, this is the kind of work that I'm interested in. And I would say if you're on the fence, like definitely just apply. Because like even just the process of applying for something and filling out the application and then doing an interview, like frankly, it's a good rep as an undergrad, or even now, like even for me, sometimes I'll apply to things I'm not necessarily like super for sure that I want to do it, but just for the repetition of practicing. And then also just getting to like meet those people and talk to the interviewers, talk to your fellow students that are interested in this area, and just continue to like make connections. Maybe that's a bit self-serving, but I think it's helpful.
It's helpful.
Yeah, almost like a practice interview, right? If you're not sure you really want to do it, but
I think too, you learn kind of what it would be like as you go through the selection process, because there's the phases in the process. So you get a sense like halfway through whether it's something you want to do more of or not, I think. So it gives you a chance to dabble, get your feet wet a little bit.